Hi everyone, and welcome to today's podcast where I'm glad to be joined by one of the true undersung legends of our game, Andy Gard, currently the head of sports science at Atlanta United. I've known Andy a long time and I'm really pleased to have him join me today. So Andy, thank you for joining us as well, and nice to get you on the podcast as well.
Steve, really appreciate it. That introduction was totally unnecessary, but much appreciated either way. And thanks for having me.
No worries. Probably so. And we were just chatting before we got on, about how the certain people that are unsung, and I do put you into that category as well, because some of the I'll let you go over your background and stuff like that as well before we dive too much further. But yeah, you've done a lot of great work, especially since and before I've known you as well. So it'd be great to get the listeners to just understand a little bit about your background and where you've been as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So I think after doing my undergrad at Durham, I then went on to Hull to do a master's by research under Rick Lovell, and had the pleasure of meeting yourself and a few other great people in Hull at that time. So that was a really cool time to really dive more into the soccer specific physiology research, which I really enjoyed, and got some kind of voluntary experience with yourself at a couple of different places there. So that was a really kind of great year to catapult me into what was then an internship at Celtic, and then lucky enough to be kept on at Celtic in a kind of a newly created role with a development squad, and then alongside that to do an embedded PhD, which was kind of fairly new at the time. There was a few other clubs in England that did a similar thing, but really lucky to be kind of given that chance by Kenny McMillan and his staff. Really great staff at Celtic, and ended up having 5 amazing years there with that PhD kind of culminating in the last couple of years. After that, then went somewhere a little bit different, over to Doha and to Aspire Academy in Qatar, working with both the academy teams at Aspire as well as the Qatar national teams with the QFA, kind of in conjunction with one another, which was just another amazing experience. With people from all over the world, fantastic people, fantastic culture, and just a really great learning opportunity for me. So taking me out of my comfort zone a little bit, but I think that was just a really great challenge and something I'm really grateful for having. After that, then was very lucky enough to kind of be approached about a potential role with US Soccer and the NWSL, the Women's Professional League out here in the US. Quite a new role that was kind of created with the women's national team and their head of performance, Dawn Scott. So that was really cool, different kind of managerial type role with some delivery, some data management across the league and the women's national teams with the US. So amazing kind of different role, but adding to kind of different skill sets as well to what I'd done previously. Couple of years after that, then kind of shifted within the federation, within the new kind of performance structure under James Bunce. He came in and kind of brought in a lot of full-time new roles to support the different national teams that the US Soccer had. So I was then looking after the men's youth national teams with a few other guys, which was, again, brilliant, experiencing tournaments, World Cups, lots of travel. But a very different kind of role to being in a day-to-day club like in Scotland or kind of in Qatar. So really getting to that different club versus country aspect and lens from a sports science perspective. And then latterly in US Soccer was also fortunate enough to be involved with the senior men's national team with their World Cup qualifying before Qatar, Gold Cup, as well as the Nations League as well, 2021. So amazing kind of six plus years there, and then moved on to my current role now in MLS with Atlanta United, where I'm head of sports science and kind of help to manage some of the frameworks in terms of data and monitoring and testing, recovery, nutrition, as well as the planning and periodization with the technical staff and the high performance director. So quite different roles, but all massively enjoyable and very fulfilling in their own way.
And before we get on to some of the more technical questions, where was the nicest place to live? Because as nice as what Glasgow can be, I think the weather in Doha and the US might be a little bit different to sunny, blustery, rainy Glasgow, shall we say.
I had a great time in Glasgow. I'm not going to lie. Glasgow is an amazing city. The weather may be a little bit kind of inclement at times, but amazing city. So I will never I'll never regret any time there at all. But I have to say, living in California and Long Beach isn't bad either.
Exactly. There's some nice places along the way, and I suppose like when you've done quite a lot within a short space of time in your career, really, haven't you? And to spend like a really good amount of time in like some really good organisations like your Celtic, your Qatar FA and Aspire, and then now US Soccer and now Atlanta United. It's like, yeah, since we met each other during the Masters, there's been a lot go on in that, and you've probably gone on to do much bigger and better things as well. So it sounds like you've had a great experience along the way.
Yeah, no, that's not true, because we all know and aware of how much impact you've had on sports science in the industry as well, Steve. So we need to mention that on this podcast for sure.
No, we can leave. That's why I'm talking to people. I don't like talking about myself, so that's why I'm asking you all the questions and sitting on this side of the fence. So,
okay, well, you're not allowed to edit that bit out, but
okay,
yeah, I think
let's do that.
No, I count myself lucky for the roles I've had, but I'm also quite methodical in kind of what's next. And I never look too far ahead, and I always want to make the most of the roles I'm in and squeeze as much as I can out, learn as much as I can, meet as many people as I can, get diverse experiences to kind of broaden my horizons and make me as well-rounded as I can as a sports scientist or performance coach. So I think that's always ongoing for all of us, and it never ends. We can always learn from other people and evolve our practices.
Exactly, and the term itself, sports science, has evolved massively, even then from when we were starting out as well. Like, you look at, I suppose that'd be one good thing to dive into as well. Like, is ultimately like, what's kind of sports science been globally for you when you've gone to all these different places? Has it been the same, or what's been the biggest learnings for you across like the different environments in the world that you've been in?
Yeah, there's definitely similarities between it all. There's definitely kind of a common thread that do kind of link those roles and the job that I've done within those organizations. But I think one of the kind of the primary things to kind of remember when you're in moving organizations or sports, even whatever it is to understand kind of the goal of the organization, what's their philosophy as a whole entity, but also maybe in the department I'm in, performance medicine, however it's called, and what's their philosophy, because that's then up to me to be adaptable to their philosophy, their methodologies, overseeing and the kind of the guys and overseeing that department. So I need to be flexible and react to some of that and learn from them and their directives, but try to put some of my philosophies and experiences in with it too. It's a little bit of a balance and a compromise, I think. But I guess the common theme between the different roles I've moved to is that I feel our job is to support and be a really good supporting cast member, provide the coaches, technical director, high performance director, whoever it is, with the right information, pertinent information, with the millions of data points we get now with the technologies and kind of the monitoring that we do in sport, is to be able to dissect that kind of effectively, put it into the terms of the sport. When you're talking to a head coach, for example, how it's then impacting the training process and performance on the field, but really pick out those kind of pertinent data points and interpret them clearly in relation to kind of soccer or football performance, so they can get the best supporting information and make the right decisions, because ultimately the decisions are there. So I think that's always been will be a common thread, kind of in my role and wherever I go, is to help the coach and the senior kind of execs in that way. I think, but making sure. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say we should have put a disclaimer out before the start of the podcast that we'll be fluctuating between football and soccer throughout this as well. Like, given it's a British call, but we're both used to saying soccer on a daily basis now as well. And you've written a ridiculous amount of words for your PhD and masters using the term soccer, no doubt, as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I might interchange. So apologies for that.
No problems whatsoever. Again, hopefully it's a global audience and everyone needs to know what we're talking about. And there's different codes of football. And I suppose, like, when you first started in the States as well, sports science was still relatively a new concept there as well. So have you found any, like, I know you talked about the verticals and everything else when you talk like running a needs analysis of the environment and that. Have you found any kind of differences with the cultural embracement of sports science, shall we call it, when you've been working in those different environments as well?
Not necessarily. I think sometimes, for example, with a national teams, like sometimes they had, it'll be more part-time network staff that would come in, but then move to a more kind of full-time model with a new high-performance director come in. So I think sometimes when there's a lack of consistency in that respect with supporting staff and not knowing how each other works, then sometimes there's a little bit more hesitancy. But I think as you build that rapport over time, then it's the relationships are great. And sports science, performance, strength and conditioning in the US are getting to such a high level, and there's so many great people here to network and again learn off. Like that's only good for the US and sports in these countries. Like so that will always remain, I think. And in that respect, like I don't think there's a huge difference.
No, and it was nice, and I remember talking to you about it late last year, but it was nice to see that there was the first kind of MLS sports science soccer summit as well, which you attended as well, didn't you? So that must have been like a nice experience to get all the... That wouldn't have happened like when you first started back in the US, would it? Like that wasn't even in place kind of thing back then.
Yeah, and you're right. I think initially with the inception of leagues like MLS, and for example, that started with sports medicine. Sports science wasn't really a massively recognized field at the time, but now we have these organizations for professionals to join where we're having a more of a voice at the table and being able to share with our medical colleagues and those in higher level front offices and stuff to have those sports science conversations and kind of emphasize the importance and what we believe in terms of supporting player performance, reducing the risk of injuries. It's a multidisciplinary thing. Like whether you're in a club or a national team or within a league organization, we should always be talking together with different stakeholders from different departments, because I think it brings that diversity of thought as well, which is so important in the room in whatever field you're in. And in a meeting, it's good to have that diversity of thought and different experiences to come up with the best solutions for, in this case, soccer players in the US.
And do you think, like, I suppose we got an education around like sports sciences about the internal external relationship, the dose response relationship, and how they kind of marry up. Do you think, like, and again, and we'll come on to your PhD later on, but do you think we've leaned more towards the external kind of loading because of technology? Or I know you were heavily influenced by the likes of Kenny, by the likes of Rick within that physiology kind of environment because of what they came through. Do you think sports science has moved away from something like heart rate as a prescription method, for example, within your kind of experience as well?
Yeah, I think it has at times, and I think something like heart rate is something we did use a lot in Scotland, and I think it definitely has its place. It may not be something that you use kind of blanket across a team every single day, for example, but you may use certain days in your conditioning days or in pre-season where you want to evaluate changes in fitness and training status, and you want to see what is the change in that internal, that physiological cost, and heart rate for me can really provide that. Same in like a rehab setting, for example. If it's a mid to long term injury, then by standardizing certain drills and assessments, you're able to see that change in training status and fitness over a long term return to play. So I think it can definitely complement those external load measures from obstacle tracking, GPS, for example, which are so commonly used now. But I don't think we can forget that internal cost or response to a given stimulus, and how we can assess cardiovascular fitness, for example, in conjunction with things like RPE and things as well, which is obviously a more global measure of internal load.
Yeah, which, judging by the experience you had across different age groups, and now you're obviously at first team, but along the way you've had like the under 21s or professional development phase players, then you had obviously the academy players that aspire as well, like, and even I think I remember sending you out on a Sunday morning to monitor the under 11s at Scunny United, like in a freezing cold rain as well at some point. So How have you found like the implementation of an application of sports science across different age groups as well? Like, has your practice kind of been influenced by who you're dealing with in front of you as well?
Yeah, I think there's similarities between them all, and again, it's good. It's really good that I feel grateful to experience it in different age groups and different levels of play. In terms of what your approach is, you still have your kind of core philosophy and principles, I think, but I think it then makes you think how can you adapt them a little bit for this age group or this kind of level of play, and between kind of genders as well, between the male and female game, which is again really both really kind of cool environments to experience as well, with great players and athletes. I think doing the basics right first, so programming, profiling, those types of things, whatever is kind of feasible in your environment and the resources you have. How can you assess your players, where they're at in terms of physical status, training status, and capacities, and then how does that then influence your programming, your periodization in conjunction with the coaching staff, in the gym, on the field, all these different types of things. They're going to be tweaked and have their little nuances, particularly in regard to things like stage of maturation, for example. And obviously there's a lot of research on that now, but how can we effectively bridge the gap from a younger age group all the way up to a first team within a club environment, for example, in terms of long-term athlete development. So take the time with some of the younger guys to really properly coach, cue, get them in certain positions, fundamental movements, make sure they can execute well, and promote that physical literacy with perhaps a younger age group, for example, get that movement quality, which is then going to set them up nicely for kind of moving through and progressing through the academy, reserves, first team at a certain club, where that philosophy is aligned all the way through. But yeah, there's accounting for them. There's physical literacy, stage of maturation, and physical status. I think those are the big things with the young ones, in terms of how we programming. So those are the big rocks, and then that'll kind of evolve as you get towards the first team and the seniors.
And again, like, did you find much difference between the male and the female athletes as well when you were working them? I know obviously it was more of a managerial role within the US women's setup as well, but yeah, what was like the main differences that you saw between the two setups in your experience as well?
I mean, amazing to work with, like working with the female population, just hungry athletes wanting to get better, wanting to ask every question of you to help their performance was one of the first things I noticed. And some of the athletes you get there are truly incredible, like in terms of work rates, fitness levels, desire, in terms of maximal speed outputs as well, like incredible athletes. But we need to be aware, as we know, the physiology and the anatomy of the female athlete and how that differs, which then sent me back to reading and really delving into why things are different and how we can then program differently on the field and in the gym. The things we need to be monitoring. Obviously, the kind of things like menstrual cycle tracking has come a long way since that, which was kind of 8 or 9 years ago now when I was working with those teams. But there needs to be a different lens when working with that population. And some of the research now is telling us that we can't treat them the same. So that's when that scientific underpinning, the continual research, which is still going on, is so important for these different populations. In terms of managing them in the right way to optimize performance.
Yeah, and I had an interesting fact. I have to thank, like, again, Dawn Scott, who you mentioned as well, like bringing this to my attention. But there's only like 6% of sports science research is based on the female athlete as well, which is quite a staggering fact when we think about it. I mean, hopefully it'll change, but just out of curiosity, because we were chatting about before, like, how many papers do you reckon you've read over like your career, like research and stuff like that? So, because there's, again, I know we're doing a podcast ironically, but it's not just as easy as listening to a podcast and you've got all that knowledge. How much reading have you actually had to do over your career to really absorb the information to inform your practice as a sports scientist as well?
Thousands, and the folders and the lists of PDFs I have on my computer is crazy, going through undergrad, masters, and PhD. But yeah, honestly, it impacts my practice every day. And I'll recall papers every day about things that have cropped up in that moment, or a challenge that's coming up in the next week or two, and that I need to go back and read about because we have a problem that we're going to need to solve within our team or within a player. But across my kind of academic studies and that it was huge because it's such a big underpinning, being able to understand the physical demands of soccer or team sports in general, rugby, AFL, field hockey, and the like, and the physiological kind of consequences of those trainings and competitions in those sports. That underpins what I do every single day and have done for the last few years. So having a really good appreciation for that, even though it's a lot of time spent reading, as you know, and it can get quite heavy at times, but that really helps kind of set me up and give me the foundation for what I need to be confident in what I'm talking to a coach or a player about, what I'm prescribing for a certain drill or training session or exercise in the gym, recovery strategy, nutrition and sleep education as well. All these things will come under my remit, but I think I have a decent grasp of why we are advising certain things, because that's what players want to know. Why am I doing this? And I will have a rationale, hopefully underpinned by science, to say this is why, but also this is why it's going to help you on the field. And that's the big thing. That's what they want to know. Like, why is this going to help? How is this going to make me fitter, faster, stronger, and perform better for 90 plus minutes on the weekend? So, I won't underestimate kind of the reading I've done in the literature in the past. But as you know, again, that's constantly evolving as we've just mentioned. So it's important to kind of keep abreast of developments in certain areas of the research too.
Yeah, and we'll touch on your PhD in a second, but just out of interest, how did you find the difference between reading all those papers compared to writing papers yourself? And what kind of values or lessons did you take from that were the main differences between writing and reading?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's not easy to write, and
topic as well. Apologies.
No, it's okay. And I certainly have a long way to go if I want to kind of keep doing that and keep improving and making sure that the writing's at a good level, which is obviously really important these days. So yeah, not easy, but I think the more you read, and also getting advice from supervisors over the years in terms of how to read a research paper is really important, because then that will help inform your writing if you ever do write a research paper. And I think the big thing for me was being able to critique it and have that kind of critical eye or critical lens in terms of what is the kind of the quality of this paper like, what the statistics like, and the validity, reliability like of the methods used, the population used, as well as the rest of the kind of the methodology employed. But then in my head, I would be thinking as well, how is this potentially applicable to my environment, or is it not? Because every environment, as I said earlier, is different. But it's important you kind of have that lens and say, like, is this going to be beneficial to me and my athletes or not? Or why is that? So I think that's something I always have going through my head in terms of when reading these papers. What's the benefit? How's it going to impact my team? And is it not? Then maybe it's time to kind of look in a different avenue or a different direction. So not easy, but definitely over time you get pick up the habits, and you know the nuances to look at in terms of what's a quality research paper, and then how can I reflect that in my writing as well.
How hard is it to find either the time or the resource to now write a paper yourself? Now you're an established practitioner, you've been working at this a long time, probably a gap between your PhD and the kind of writing side. How hard have you found it to try and keep in touch with that writing side? If it's a desirable for you to carry on kind of thing as well. Yeah,
and I'd say it is, but it's the other caveat to that, as I say, it's never a priority, because that's not the main part of my job. Right now, it's looking after the team, looking after the players, and making sure, again, they're fit and available for the coach every game day. So, but I think on the flip side of that, if within our department, if there's certain questions or challenges that are arising, and it's something we want to look into more in terms of anything in-house research-wise, then it's massively warranted. And if that leads to reading, if that leads to a publication of sorts, then fantastic, because it's good for the club, it's good for the league and MLS to show the quality of work being done within the league. But we also want to answer certain performance-related questions within our environment. So maybe it's just an in-house pilot study to start with that can spawn to something greater. But if it's improving our practices in our team right now, that's kind of the main priority before doing anything further than that.
Which is great. So Colin, then the aims of your PhD studies, then all those years ago now, what was kind of like the influencing performance questions behind that as well? I'm guessing you didn't just pop up one day, click your fingers, go, "Oh yeah, I'm doing that." How did you actually come about, like the research questions? Did it relate to a performance questions? And first of all, what did you actually do for your PhD for the listeners that might not be aware?
Yeah, I need to remember it was a long time ago. That was about 12 years ago now. So when that started, so it was I guess it was towards the kind of the infancy of GPS units coming across the UK with those early kind of Catapult Minimax units that we know well. But we wanted to answer. We wanted to answer questions as a department, and our head of sports science, Kenny, he really wanted to utilize this technology more to be able to understand what we were subjecting our players to more. As I said earlier at the start, it's important to know the style of play as well as the training philosophy of the club and that you're at, and what their goals are. And we had a very strong kind of philosophy within our department and within our club of using certain drills that the manager liked, but we didn't fully understand what we were subjecting the players to from an internal load and an external load point of view. So we basically did an audit using these early GPS Minimax units and the Polar Team system heart rate just to audit the common training drills that we did. But what we did after that is then we took it to a further level in terms of breaking them down to different conditions and manipulations we can do in terms of absolute and relative areas per player, overload, underload scenarios, all the way up to kind of medium and larger sided games as well. So we could really understand what those demands were from a physiological point of view, as well as a kind of a kinematic point of view as well, with running outputs, which would then help to, I guess, periodize our training week more, understand what we were doing on what day, what outputs and adaptations we were going for, depending on the stage of the season, as well as the kind of the schedule of games. But we were able to be a lot more confident in what we were prescribing and the outputs it was giving, as part of an appropriately periodized week leading up to a game on a Saturday, for example.
Right, so I suppose that leads us on nicely to the research paper that we were talking about, which I'm guessing this was one of the studies from your PhD. So for those listeners, there will be a link to the paper as part of the podcast as well. And the title of this paper, Andy, was "The Influence of Relative Playing Area and Player Numerical Imbalance on Physical and Perceptual Demands in Soccer Small-Sided Game Formats." A long title as well, but there was a lot to actually go into this paper. And I'm guessing this was one of the studies that kind of sums up your PhD quite nicely as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners in soccer or other kind of team sports can relate a lot to this as well, because they're quite common scenarios in training, and as part of the training process, depending on the day of the week. So they're common drills in different sports. But how can we manipulate these conditions to emphasize or de-emphasize certain things, whether it's more of a physical day we're looking for, or even perhaps a lower intensity, more kind of technical emphasis certain day, or increasing cognitive emphasis, for example. I think it's important to marry those three or periodize them in different ways across the week, like we do with the overall load, physical load, but things like nutrition as well. Like they all link in together in how we periodize these and constructing the most appropriate week, depending on the situation or context of the club at that point in time. So offered great kind of information from biomechanical load, mechanical actions, cardiovascular responses, as well as just general running outputs as well. So it was, as I say, towards the inception of when kind of GPS was coming into sports a bit more frequently. And there's been a lot more research since that takes this a lot further. But this, at the time, was a really good basis for us as a club and a department to really hang our hats on our philosophy and be confident in what we prescribe to the guys.
Nice. And yeah, this kind of paper always resonates with me as well, because like no matter wherever you travel in the world, no matter where you go, you'll always see those underloaded, overloaded games as well. So it's nice to see that paper induced. I mean, how often, for example, do you guys do rondos or boxes or a session game where there's like a couple of people in the middle running around chasing after everyone, depending on what we call it around the world? Because I know there's different definitions.
Yeah,
Right.
it's still pretty common. It's still pretty common, but then we do take that further now with Atlanta into certain kind of more tactically specific drills in terms of what we think we're going to face on the weekend with a certain opponent. If we're going to be overloaded or underloaded in certain areas of the pitch, depending on how the opposition sets up and their style of play. So there's definitely a bigger kind of tactical emphasis to these as well. The more you understand these games, but relating to kind of the opponent, the analysis of the opponent from coaches and our performance analysts as well. So they all feed into that process to kind of help influence our training process during the week.
And I suppose, like, listening to all that as well, would you say the PhD kind of like is still influencing your practice to date now, given like everything you talk about from a practical perspective, that those 3 to 5 years work at Celtic doing your PhD, they seem to have like continued without your career, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's always going to be elements of the PhD, of different studies and the reading you did that again, as I said earlier, can be applied on a daily basis. And it could be thinking on your feet because we're a player short today from what we had planned. So how can we adjust the modifications and the conditions we provide to the players? And what's the effect going to be on that player, that position in this drill? Is it going to overload him in terms of the amount of high speed running that they're kind of exposed to, or is someone not going to get enough for a certain day? So it's a constant thing in the process as you watch the planning or the drill unfold, and how to make modifications and manipulations to make sure everyone is kind of getting the planned stimulus for that day, to make sure they're as prepared as possible. So it's a constant thought process, as I say, and it's something that the PhD did definitely set me up for.
Like, I suppose, like, have you got like a more favoured kind of drill or approach to your conditioning kind of field-based sports now? So again, hypothetically, like, I'm very heavily influenced by like Mike Bashite's high intensity interval training work and box to box kind of conditioning and 15 on, 15 off and so on. Have you got like kind of a go-to? Like, I know Kenny was very big on the 4 times 4 minutes on, 2 minutes rest as part of his PhD, and that was influencing his. So what's kind of like your go-to conditioning protocol as well?
I'm going to sit heavily on the fence here and say it's honestly a bit of a blend of the things you've mentioned. The hit science stuff, a lot of the stuff from the Scandinavians and Kenny, as you mentioned, with the kind of the 4/4s and time above 90% max heart rate for kind of central adaptations. I want to kind of include that where I can, where it's relevant at the stage of the season. It's maybe more in pre-season, depending on the numbers we have and kind of the aims of the coach as well. But it's something I do still try to include, particularly in rehab at the moment, depending on the injury and the kind of the severity or duration that player is out. But I think things like running like that or kind of dribbling tracks 4 times 4 minutes are very safe ways of conditioning, but still getting technical elements in as well. Keeping the player engaged when there's the use of a ball and different kind of low-level multi directional elements and movements too. So I think they definitely have a place. In terms of some of the more generic or conditioning without a ball and some of the stuff that Martin does as well, I think we do program that a lot still. Maybe it's on a timer after a game when we're conditioning subs who haven't played many minutes or not played at all. Or if there's not if we don't have the big numbers to do larger conditioning drills and we're doing smaller stuff, then maybe between small-sided games, we can construct a really good high-intensity session there, which we used to do in Scotland quite a lot, particularly on a Wednesday on a -3 at the time, where we do 4v4s, 5v5, 6v6, but different interval running blocks in between, and we're shooting for kind of maybe 20 minutes plus above 90% maximum heart rate. So we know we're having a really good kind of mechanical load with the small-sided games, but we're also getting the high-speed running and cardiovascular load from both of that, and the linear running as well, and interval runs. So I think it's about being creative and kind of being a bit of an artist in terms of when you program these, when it's appropriate. But I think they all definitely have their place at different times of the week or different times of the season, depending on the kind of the scenario and the situation.
Yeah, and it made me smile then as well, because I always remember in the early days, like a sports science, when you're a young practitioner, you're looking to kind of not find a cheat code and stuff like that. Who can you learn from? Who can you go into? And some of the 4x4 minute aerobic endurance work really struck it across the industry. So I remember people saying, like, okay, we want to try and get 20 minutes in our heart rate red zones most sessions. And funny enough, what you just described there for like your small-sided games and your intervals is that 20 minutes around the above 85%, which people class in the red zone. So there has been like that good influence of physiological heart rate prescription back in the day. And now I suppose like moving forward, fast forward from the early days of like Paul Balsam, Kenny McMillan, Chris Barnes doing a lot of heart rate stuff early in the sports science practitioner days. I'll include Dave Carolyn within that as well. Like fast forward now 20 years, and we're, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, there's been an influx of technology like GPS, even from physiological measurements and recovery status. We're starting to drown in the world of sports technology, which I know is rich given my position as well. But if we fast forward for another 10, 15, 20 years, what do you think like the future innovations and applications of sports science will be like within your field now, and then maybe across like the different industries that you've worked as well?
I mean, I think the amount of information that we have at our hands and our fingertips now is incredible as it is. But I think that's only going to grow with the various different companies that are coming on the market. They're providing more and more solutions to us to solve performance-related questions, to maximize performance on the pitch, reduce the risk of injuries, and this is only going to keep going. I think objectivity is another thing. They want us to measure more than anything and really understand our athletes, which for me is great. If we can get more of a blueprint or a fingerprint of our athlete, where they're at, what their profile is and what deficiencies are, and how we can improve their physical capacities, then that's only better for people like us. But again, as I said at the start, it's up to us. Just like when we're talking to a coach, we have to be able to disseminate what the right information is. We have things like velocity-based training now, tools like 1080 Sprint, obviously kind of AI-related stuff, machine learning. Like, this is all amazing stuff, but some of those I've mentioned just now, like AI, for example, like we're still learning how to use that and how effective that can be within sports and how it's going to affect our performance. I think it has a lot of pros, and will continue to do that in terms of processing like massive amounts of information and large data sets really quickly, which is going to save us time as practitioners. And that's something we'll always be striving for, more time. We need more time to do this, that, or the other. So that's a massive help in that response. But I think, as I allude to with some of the kind of the reading of the literature and the research out there, it's really important to keep that kind of critical eye or lens going, just to question the quality of what we're putting into these models or and machine learning data sets. But what's the output like? What's the quality of that? And can we apply it readily to our environment? Because my question would be, is everything we do has context, and are these machines and models kind of taking into account that context of where we are in Atlanta, in MLS, with the travel schedules we have, the environmental challenges with heat, humidity, altitude, for example, and the continued kind of fixture congestion that we're all kind of experiencing? Is it able to account for these things in the programming and recommendations? Which, again, circling it back to the start, is where we come in as individuals, and let's not kind of lose the human aspect, I would say, in just speaking to a player or an athlete and how you doing, what's up, is there anything I can help with, but just on that human level and understanding in terms of context and interpretation, I think is really important. And I think the last thing I'd say on that is probably as well is these tools or new technologies really make you think, or should make you kind of double down on the processes you have as a practitioner, but as a department in our case, for example, and what kind of club or institution you're working at, just I think reviewing what you do and making sure you're doing the basics right, and not just kind of just jumping on new technologies without doing kind of due diligence and checking out their actual impacts and how it can help your environment. But making sure you have a solid basic scientific framework to start with in the different facets of monitoring, nutrition, recovery, strength and conditioning. And you stick to those consistently and doing that really, really well before you then start to adopt this stuff and have that certainty that's, again, going to impact you, your environment, and your athletes with the right context.
Yeah, it's always that value proposition and what does it actually add to your program and what questions does it actually answer. And you made a good point about making sure you've got a good performance question to frame the solutions around, rather than the other way, which sometimes we fall into a trap of within our industry as well. Like it's and until we maybe get like voice recognition, emotional kind of auto detection, whereby as you ask that question of how are you doing today, whatever the athlete says back, something can dictate that and then put it, we're far away from that as well. So no, it's great to see. And I suppose like the last question I'll ask just on that, how do you think as a industry, a discipline, how do we go from descriptive to prescriptive? Because I think that's one of the biggest issues potentially in sports science and where the innovations are coming. How do we go from describing what we're seeing to being that more prescriptive, and actually people can back, I suppose that's a lot of like the sports science kind of methodologies through bases and everything else. It's like, how do you go from descriptive data to prescribing appropriate protocols to follow as well?
Yeah, I think that's where the whole themes of data quality, the level of analysis you can do and finding trends and relationships, I think that where that starts to come into play a little bit, using the resources you have at a club and the data engineers or data scientists to use their skill sets to help you, again, answer a question that may end up proving you wrong. And it's not actually sensitive to measuring training load or fatigue and neuromuscular fatigue in a protocol that you're doing. So I think that's where the process becomes a lot more well-rounded, and making sure you're bringing in other experts in the room or in the building to really go through your processes with a fine-tooth comb. And again, if it doesn't seem to have a relationship or a trend to improving performance or managing that athlete, then maybe it's time to reevaluate and we change that for something else. But I think, the level of analysis is really important, not just to continue to describe and go from week to week and month to month and season on season, but really look at what you're doing in depth as a process to see if there's a real kind of correlation or relationship there. But if not, then it's time to reevaluate. So I think that's a really good point to keep reviewing as a department or even as an individual. Review what you do. Our mental skills coach always tells us about the kind of the military athlete or military people he's worked with, and that we should be doing after action reviews like they do in the armed forces and stuff like that. And I think that's a really good process to do, because it keeps you at the high level in terms of the quality of your processes and procedures, which is ultimately going to benefit the athletes and coaches when it comes to match day. So slightly long-winded answer, but I think it just gets you to plan, do, and review more as that evaluation process, and kind of eliminate some of the noise and focus on the signal.
No, that's been fantastic, Andy. And again, appreciate your time joining us as well, and especially on a day off. So, and good luck for the rest of the season as well, like as we finished the podcast, and hope you guys make the playoffs and do well there as well. So yeah, on behalf of all the listeners and the podcast, thank you again, Andy, for joining us as well.
Thank you, mate. It was a pleasure talking to you as always. I appreciate you. Thank you.